We're talking spicy foods with Chris Biderman. I don't know. I don't know why, but that's just where the conversation took us. As we welcome in our good friend from the Sacramento Bee, our man Chris Biderman. Chris, we missed you, buddy. How are you?
I'm doing well. I miss you guys too. How are you guys?
Good, man.
We good,
Good.
bro. We
There's
good,
there's we might go long here, Jesse. There's a lot I want to talk to you about. I didn't expect Bradley Beal and OG Anunoby to be a part of the discussion today.
Here we go.
I will say, do got a couple of 49ers related questions and want to talk a lot about the article that you wrote yesterday. That was really, really good stuff about Sacramento wanting another sports franchise. So we'll get to that. We learned today Bradley Beal would waive his no trade clause to come to Sacramento. We've heard, Chris, that the Kings are aggressively pursuing OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors. Either of those players entice you? Does one entice you more than the other? You know, we've gone over trade ideas and trade packages and how each fits with the team. Does either one of those guys stand out to you?
Yeah, probably OG a little bit more, just because I think he gives them the wing defense that maybe they lack, and coming into this offseason, whether it's a draft or free agency, and whatever happens with Harrison Barnes, if he goes, you need athleticism on the wing, and so for me, that's really where I think the team could use an upgrade, and I think Kessler Edwards developing could fill a little bit of that void too, but. Obviously, there would be a pretty substantial drop off if you're replacing Harrison Barnes with Kessler Edwards in the starting lineup. So, I think OG makes a little bit more sense to me in terms of where the Kings need to improve. But if you get Bradley Beal in the shot making, he could potentially provide you. That could be, pretty beneficial. Although you're probably not going to play a whole lot of defense, and then is Kevin Huerter then coming off the bench? What's that all look like? Is he part of that trade? I'm guessing maybe Kevin Huerter might be part of that trade. But really the big question for me, if you're the Kings, are you putting Keegan Murray in any deal? Because he's ultimately, given that he's on a rookie cost controlled contract, he's the team's most valuable asset outside of De'Aaron Fox and maybe Domantas Sabonis, but can you get one of those guys without giving up Keegan? And I would lean towards probably just trying to keep Keegan and keep that core together. But if you can get one of those guys without giving up Keegan, then I think that becomes really appealing. So yeah, in terms of where I think the Kings need to improve, I think OG Anunoby makes a lot of sense. I could understand the interest in Bradley Beal. I just don't know. The Kings were already the best offense in the league last year. And I know Bradley Beal is a big name and would seemingly change a lot, but I just don't know that the Kings are a drastically better team with Bradley Beal, because they're still not really going to defend, all that well in the regular season, and they might be a little bit worse defensively in the playoffs. And I am curious what it would cost. I know Bradley Beal's market might not be as hot as it once was, particularly given that contract. So there are definitely a lot of layers to it, and you got to wonder, does Vivek have an appetite to get into the luxury tax, because you're looking at a potentially new contract for Domantas Sabonis this time next year. You're obviously paying De'Aaron Fox the max. So there are a lot of questions about that going forward for sure.
So here's one of the reasons why Bradley Beal and a player like him would interest me, even considering, like you said, Chris, this team was already fantastic on the offensive end. When I looked at particularly Game 5 and Game 7 of that first round series, I said, man, the Warriors kind of figured out what they wanted to do defensively to take the Kings offense out of their flow. They need a guy that can go off script. They've got Fox, they've got Monk, but everybody else is kind of, to use a baseball term, station to station, right? There's no home run hitters. And when they were able to make the Kings station to station and not take away, but neutralize Fox and Monk, they had nobody that can go off script. And I said, I don't know where you find them, but you need one other guy that can go off script and score to take the load off of Fox and Monk to have to do it all the time. And that's the thing that intrigues me about Bradley Beal. He has that ability in a playoff setting to go off script and get 20, 25 points. And I think they really needed that in the playoffs. I'm not saying, like, if they hit open shots, they probably still win that series. But that's something that really stood out to me is, like, if Kevin Herter wasn't hitting a wide open catch and shoot three, it didn't feel like he could do anything else out there. And I need a guy that can do that and can put the ball on the deck, go one-on-one, get to the foul line, things of that nature. So that's where Bradley Beal kind of appeals to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can look at two spots when it comes to the Kings not beating the Warriors in the playoffs. I think it was Kevin Herter's spot and Harrison Barnes, just from like a pure scoring perspective. And I think you're hitting on the right notes when talking about like where the Kings can improve and potentially make that next step. But it's not, year to year, like it's not always going to look. We can't just say, okay, the Kings needed to score more in this area, and then that's going to fix their problems going into next year. Like it's going to be an entirely different team. And one thing, if you make a deal like that, like you're shipping pieces out. Like if you're Washington, are you getting Malik Monk in that deal, right? Like, are you?
No. No.
Right.
Definitively no.
Right. Though, if you're Washington, you got to ask, right?
Sure.
And what's it look like if you're the Kings? Are you going to have is Mike Brown going to have an appetite to play De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, and Bradley Beal all at the same time, right? So there are questions like that, and we'll see how all of that plays out. But like bigger picture, if I'm the Kings, I don't really care about draft picks at this point. Like I would be all in on trading 2-3 first round draft picks if it does get you a star. I don't think Bradley Beal would cost that much in terms of draft capital because his contract is so onerous. But if you can get an OG Anunoby and it costs you 2 first round picks, like I'm cool with that. 2 or 3. I'm if I'm Monty McNair, I do not care about first round picks because I'm expecting to contend, and those first round picks are going to be late in the first round anyway. So it's not like these are the Kings of yesteryear where they're in the lottery. Like this is potentially a really good team, and picks should be less valuable to Monty McNair. So I'm definitely all in on the idea of pushing all my chips in. Where I would be a little dubious is like, all right, do I include Keegan in that trade? Probably not, depending on the player, but they're gonna think about everything when it comes to improving the team.
I don't want to include Keegan in either one of these trades. That's just is what it is. But I also wonder, is there a cartoon character that the Kings have that they're holding hostage?
That's a good call. Do we have Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, similar to what ABC did with Al Michaels? That's a good call right there. Good callback too. One of our more intriguing discussions of the summer, Chris Biderman, was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Let me ask you both a question. I'm thinking back to last trade deadline. I think it was Zach Lowe. I think Zach Lowe was the one who reported that the Raptors turned down 3 first-round picks for OG. I think it was Memphis
at the trade deadline.
Yeah, I think it was Memphis, and I think it was Indiana. And Masai, the quote, and it might have been to just Zach Lowe, but the line from Masai Ujiri was we want a really good player in return. If landing OG cost you Keegan, does that still work for anybody here? Because to me, if you land OG without Keegan, you lose Harrison. If you have to trade Keegan, you find a way to sign Harrison back.
I that's not a good enough deal for me to move on from Keegan Murray.
No, yeah, I'm with you. I think if you look at rookies who shoot the ball the way Keegan did last year and just sort of spin that forward, like he could be one of the best shooters in the league for a long time. And given his size and the potential he has to improve defensively and as a playmaker, I think Keegan could be a guy that eventually is better than OG Anunoby, right? So I like if I had to give up one of the two, I'm doing a sign and trade with Harrison Barnes. As valuable as he was, I just think, he in the playoffs, and we have a pretty big sample size now of him in the playoffs, he's not going to be that guy that elevates your team in a way that you would need him in a series like a round 1 against the Warriors. So I would,
But
if
that
I had my
requires
choice,
Harrison's cooperation and
Yeah.
Toronto's desire to acquire Harrison Barnes.
I do know Harrison likes
Toronto.
Toronto.
Well, everybody likes
Yeah,
Toronto.
That's what I heard.
I ain't been there. Have you been?
Yeah, I did the game that Mike Brown got ejected. What was that, December?
Oh, that's
And
right. Yeah,
and Jordy Fernandez. Yeah, so that was my first time in Toronto. Beautiful city.
I've heard Toronto's fun though.
Yeah.
Zion cannot get traded to Toronto from what I hear. There'd be significant issues with that. Just what I've heard. Just what I've heard.
Well,
from what you've heard, huh?
Yeah, it's
Sources have told D'Lo and Casey,
Hey,
do not trade Zion to Toronto.
Zion would love it.
I know he would. That's why you can't trade him there. That's why he's got to stay away from there. Chris, what do you think the next couple of weeks look like for the Kings? Obviously, we're 7 days away from the NBA draft, about 14, 15 days away from the start of free agency, of course, the California Classic. Right after that, what do you think these next couple of weeks look like for the Kings?
I think they're going to be rumored in a lot of things. I think they're going to be aggressive in a lot of free agents that could potentially spring free. I think Cam Johnson would make a ton of sense. I think a sign and trade with Harrison Barnes would make a lot of sense in that, you're not just letting a $15 to $20 million salary slot go for nothing. I think if you can get a little bit younger at that spot, maybe a little bit, add some athleticism to the wing, I think that would make a lot of sense. Just sort of depth on the wing overall. I think the Kings are a little small in terms of just what they have on the wing when your backup shooting guard is Malik Monk, who is more or less the size of a point guard. And Kevin Huerter's not a super athletic, defensive-minded wing. Like I said, you have Kessler Edwards, maybe someone of that similar build and athleticism would make a lot of sense to help them defensively and just be sort of a potential defensive stopper. Would make a lot of sense. I'm curious to see how aggressive they're going to be because we saw at the trade deadline last year, there were options for the Kings to potentially push all their chips in and go try to get a big name, but they decided to stay the course and build through the core that they have. And do they sort of reinforce that notion and say, no, the way we improve is to get better internally and develop the guys we already have? Or do they say, all right, we're on the brink of contending now. Do we go get a big name? Do we maybe include Keegan Murray in trade talks? Do we try to package multiple picks and Harrison Barnes and Davion Mitchell or whatever? And can they get out of Rashawn Holmes's contract? Because that's 2 or 3 more years of $12 million. And for a guy that's out of the rotation, that's obviously not ideal when you are looking at your financial future and potentially going up against attacks with a new contract for Domantas Sabonis coming next year, presumably. So there's certainly a lot of big decisions that they have to make. And I'm curious to see how aggressive they are, whether or not what they did at the trade deadline is a sign of just sort of their overall philosophy. Like, no, we want to build this out for the long haul and keep our core guys and keep building that way. Or are they going to say, we're going to get rid of 3 or 4 guys who are in our rotation and go try to get 1 or 2, bigger names, better players to get over that hump and be a team that, can get to the Western Conference Finals next year.
What's interesting? Just thinking about this, after what we talked about for much of this show and hearing Chris talk about it, I'm not saying that it's a deal breaker for me for like OG or even Bradley Beal or anything like that, or somebody like that. But man, I kind of feel like we're selling, and myself included, selling Davion Mitchell short. I like Davion Mitchell a lot as a ball player. I think he's a perfect backup point guard for this team.
Mm-hmm.
He's your best defender. Now I know if you get OG, you'd be switching out one best defender for another. I understand that. But he's your best perimeter defender. In that playoffs, he held one of the great scores we've ever seen in this game to at least making them work. I'm not saying he shut down Steph, but he has that ability to at least make Steph know that he's there, right? Steph, in Game 7, he felt like he was shooting over a chair when TD and everybody else was guarding him. Davion, he's like, all right, well, I got to try and figure this out. Are we just kind of dismissing Davion a little too quickly?
No, I agree with you. I just think like Davion's sort of that figure that you like, if you end up going to get a big name and you're another team that's dangling a big name in the trade market, like you want to get Davion, like you'd love to get Davion as part of that deal, which is why I think, he's sort of emblematic of that idea. Like, do we want to build with the core that we have and try to improve that way? Then you're keeping Davion. Whereas if you're going trying to get somebody and you need to put together a good trade package, if I'm another team, I'd love to get Davion back from the Kings in a deal like that. So he's sort of like emblematic of like what that pivot point is, because he is a really valuable player, but he's also the type that like, should Davion Mitchell prevent you from going to get, a Bradley Beal or an all NBA type player? Like, I don't know. That's a tough decision depending on what the trade package is. But I think you bring up a good point, and I would say that he sort of embodies to the Kings like what that decision is, whether it's, build with the guys we have or go out and get somebody else.
What now? I can't report this. I can report that the Kings are aggressively going after OG and Anunoby. I can speculate they're not the only ones, right? So there's a scenario here, Chris, that I'm curious your thoughts on. I mean, the Brad Beal thing, like it's cool that he'd waive his no trade clause for Sacramento. I don't think that's realistic. I don't even know that that's a conversation Monty has past a cursory call to Michael Winger. Again, OG Anunoby, Kings are pursuing him. A lot of other teams are pursuing him. If it winds up being, we hear around draft day, Harrison Barnes signs an extension with Sacramento. They make their pick. Trey Lyles is back. Maybe one or two smaller acquisitions join this team. Do you see this team potentially being back in the 2-3 spot, being back up there in the class of the Denver Nuggets this next season?
They should be. I mean, that would be sort of the linear progression, right? They absolutely should be. But I think Mike Brown made a really good point even towards the end of the season and after in his post-mortem press conference, when he said it's going to get a lot harder now. It's sort of a theme from Mike Brown throughout the year was that it's kind of easy to go from like bad to good, which was a step the Kings made last year. What's infinitely harder in his mind is going from good to great. And I think that's really the challenge the Kings have. So it's going to be up to De'Aaron Fox. Like, can he go from being a third team all NBA guy to like an MVP candidate? Can Domantas Sabonis be a guy who in the playoffs teams are not going to leave open from the perimeter? And is he going to be able to shoot confidently to make teams pay for doing that? So if there are plenty of reasons to think, if Keegan Murray gets better, both defensively and playmaking, and continues to shoot at a 40% clip from three, if Kevin Huerter is more consistent and, not red hot for a month and then ice cold for a month and red hot for a month and ice cold for a month, if he can be sort of that 40% guy throughout the breadth of a season without the roller coaster ride in terms of his shooting numbers, then yeah, the Kings absolutely are good enough to get to that point. And I think they learned a ton in this playoff run and the series against the Warriors. But it's going to be harder. They're not going to sneak up on anybody. They're not going to be a cute story. They're going to be a team that's going in with expectations, and there's going to be a different level of scrutiny in terms of how they're performing relative to those expectations, right? Like those losses that they had at home to Charlotte and Washington, sometimes when the Kings would just sort of show up and think, whether this was human nature or not, just show up to the arena and be like, oh yeah, we're the best offensive team in the league. We'll hit a bunch of shots. We'll beat these teams. Like those losses are going to be far less acceptable this year than what they were last year, right? Because you can make the point that like, yeah, they're a young team. They're going through it. They're learning how to win. They're learning how to be consistent. They're not going to have that excuse next year. Like a thing that Mike Brown said about De'Aaron Fox and him taking the next step to potentially being an MVP candidate is being a guy that brings that fourth quarter intensity, his attitude and his aggression in the fourth quarter to everything he does, right? To practice, to a walkthrough, to a shoot around, to a home game against Charlotte in December, or pick any sub 500 team at home. Like that's the difference in Mike Brown's mind between being good and great for somebody like De'Aaron Fox. And De'Aaron Fox is ultimately the tone setter of this team. So that's going to be their battle. And I absolutely think De'Aaron Fox, he proved a lot to me that, he's made of the right stuff and can become that player. And look, he's still 25 years old. He's got plenty of time in his prime to continue improving. And if he does elevate himself to, one of the 8 best players in the NBA unequivocally and potentially in the MVP conversation, then yeah, the Kings will absolutely find themselves in the conversation with the Nuggets in the Western Conference, but it is a big mountain to climb to get to that point. But I do think they're equipped to do it.
I think the guys they have on this roster are built to accept that challenge and to not only look at what they did last year and gain confidence, but also be motivated by it. We talk about De'Aaron Fox and what he had to endure in his first 5-6 seasons in the league. He may look at last year and playing in that first round and getting those accolades and be like, I'm not going back. Like, I'm not, like, whatever I got to do, the work that I got to put in, whatever, I'm not going back to puke guy at center court. Like, I got a taste of, that good life. I got to stay here. And also, you look at the performances of 2 guys in particular, Sabonis and Kevin Huerter in the playoffs. And that may be something that, not that they needed it, I'm not saying they needed it, but kind of humbles them and keeps them hungry going in the next season. I'm sure that loss left a bitter taste in their mouth with how that playoff run went for them personally. And they could be motivated, as the summer goes along and into training camp to say, hey, I gotta play better. I gotta pick my game up. So when I'm in that spot again, those same situations don't happen. So I see these guys being motivated, even though they had a level of success last year.
A name that has sprung to my mind over the last few months, I don't know how much you guys have talked about. Where are you guys at on Jaylen Brown and a potential trade for him?
I love Jaylen Brown here.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer. Like, that's
No-brainer,
easy.
right?
I don't see a scenario where it works because I feel like, and I understand, like, people, especially, Jesse's aware, he's a Celtics fan. People close to Boston know, like, he has his issues with Boston. I don't know Jaylen at all. I'm going to go out on a limb, though, and say he doesn't have $100 million worth of issues with the Boston Celtics because that's what he'd have to give up now. Right. If he doesn't sign the extension that he's going to be offered this offseason, obviously that's going to cue the Celtics. Okay, he doesn't want to be here. But now, because he's a super max player, you're turning down an incredible amount of money. And I don't think that's realistic, no matter how much you hate a city.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is because when the Celtics were in Sacramento late in the season, he had a press conference afterwards. And it was around the time that Logan Murdoch wrote that piece in The Ringer talking about sort of the uncertainty that he faces in Boston and things like that. And he talked about, and this was unrelated to that, but he was asked questions about, Cal Berkeley and being part of the coaching search there, and just really indicated like, yeah, he's still super connected to that program. He was in conversations with their AD about, about the potential coaching hire. He loves the Bay Area, Northern California, and he's obviously, a guy with, I don't know if political aspirations is the way to put it, but somebody who's very socially conscious and I think politically motivated potentially. And I was just thinking, like, California state capital, it wouldn't be crazy for somebody who wanted to affect change outside of, the basketball realm and maybe in the social and political realm. Like, if he actually wanted to come, like, he's a different kind of cat. Like, somebody like him who might have those things in mind, would he be open to coming to a place like Sacramento in a way we haven't seen stars want to come to Sacramento in the past? And I'm not saying he necessarily does, but just the way he talked about being close to the Cal program and what being in Northern California meant to him in college and things like that. I was like, all right, I could see it, because you could potentially make a trade package that might make sense if the Celtics were, if he made it clear to Boston that he wasn't going to resign there and wanted to go somewhere else. That's where I'd be like, okay, you could have Davion, you could have Keegan, you could have all the picks, like, and that might be something the Celtics might actually be interested in.
Yeah, it's fun to think about. That'd be a first. like it's one thing to turn down like the extra 30 million you get. Like, and I say that like I got Kenny Caraway money. That extra 30 million. Like, we're talking $100 million that Jalen goes, nah, I'm gonna go to Sacramento.
Yeah.
And
but
then
I mean, he could potentially make that money on the back end anyway.
But you're 100% accurate. Jalen is a different dude. And we, to the best of my knowledge, everything is cool with Jalen and Tatum inside. Like, there's nothing there in terms of those two personally.
Right.
Like there was always stuff with Brad and John Wall. Like, there was never like a solid vibe there. But I don't think that's the case with Tatum and Brown. I think people just question as to whether it actually works or not. I'm of the belief it works, but I think next year could go a long way in really telling that story.
Yeah, I just bring him up because he's the dude. If I'm looking at somebody who could like realistically become available, that I'm like, all right, let's put all of our chips in and go get this big name All NBA type guy with playoff experience. Like, he's somebody who I'd think about if he were available.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I look, I'll work with him on his left hand. We'll deal with that when he gets here. I'd absolutely take Jaylen Brown in Sacramento.
I do want to reference, and we'll certainly get back to the Kings here before too long, but I do want to mention, you wrote a great piece talking about Sacramento and the obvious desire to add another sports franchise here. There was some great stats about top 20 markets, and I think it was Sacramento and Orlando that are the only two top 20 markets that don't have more than one sports franchise. Given all of the work that you did on that, like, how realistic is it for Sacramento to wind up with another sports franchise?
So it's realistic if the money comes, and the money has to come from an ownership group that's willing to, when it comes to Major League Baseball, right? Major League Baseball is talking about expansion to Nashville or Portland, and there are a bunch of other teams in that mix. And they're looking at $2 billion in expansion fees per team. And so, that's the thing that we haven't seen with, even MLS when that deal fell through a couple of years ago. The reason why really there hasn't been more substantial discussion with the MLS in expansion to Sacramento is because there hasn't been the capital investment. And then we just saw a few weeks ago that San Diego got $500 million together for an expansion fee for MLS. So ultimately, I think it's just, the appetite is here and the city wants it. There's plenty of room in the rail yards for, the Sacramento Republic's very confident that they're going to get their stadium done and shovels in the ground sooner than later. But one of my questions to the mayor, Darrell Steinberg, was like, is there more room in the rail yards for something else? And he said that they're open to anything, if anything were possible. I think what's really holding Sacramento back from getting a team is the being able to put together an ownership group that can put down billions of dollars with a B for an expansion fee and a new venue, right? And so like, and then there's always the, Sacramento's not going to publicly fund a stadium like the A's are getting in Vegas. They're just not going to do that. There's plenty of studies and there's been plenty of work done to prove that, those deals don't help municipalities financially if they're coming from taxpayer dollars. And that doesn't mean that other cities aren't going to have the appetite. I know Nashville's giving the Titans like $1 billion for their new stadium, and Buffalo's giving the Bills a whole lot of money for their new stadium. But Sacramento just doesn't have the appetite for that financial aspect of it. So ultimately, it's just going to take a deep-pocketed person to come in here with the wherewithal and say, look, I'd love to, bring a Major League Baseball team here and field as competitive of an offer as Major League Baseball might be getting from Nashville or Portland or any other city that's in that mix. So, demographically, I think the key point from the article was like, you could put Sacramento up against Charlotte, who has, the Hornets and the Panthers, or, St. Louis, who has the Cardinals and the Blues, or Indy that has the Pacers and the Colts, or Pittsburgh that has 3 teams. Like, from a demographics perspective, the number of households, the appetite for sports, you could stack Sacramento against any of those cities, and Sacramento would have a viable case that they would be able to support one or two more major league teams. The issue is there isn't that investment to be able to pay potentially $2 billion to Major League Baseball for an expansion fee, or even $500 million to MLS for an expansion fee. And so that's ultimately the big issue that the city has, but there is absolutely an appetite for it. And there's room for potentially new venues in the rail yards just north of downtown. They're just, what the city needs is a forward thinking, very, very wealthy person saying, yeah, I got you guys. I got $4 billion and we're going to get a team here, and I'm hell bent on doing it. And I think Sacramento, if that happened, like, I think they would really embrace it. We've seen, what the Kings have meant to this city and how well they draw and how well the fans rally around the team, even when they're not successful. Right. So I think something similar could happen in another sport, but ultimately, the dollars and cents are standing in the way.
Miss P, we need you.
Well, I have someone who could help. Now I'm gonna have to ask. I'll ask this as a question to Chris Biderman, but maybe this person could help. What are the chances that San Francisco pays Nick Bosa so much money this offseason that he could invest in a sports franchise in Sacramento?
100%.
Yeah, what's that going to be? Close to a $200 million contract?
I mean, he's gonna. I mean, he's gonna break records, right? Like, he's gonna break. Is it Aaron Donald's record? Like, he's going to smash the non-quarterback record, isn't he?
Yeah, it kind of depends on how long of a deal he wants, because he might want a 3-year deal so we can get another bite at the apple in free agency 3 years from now and then cash in again. Whereas, if he signs a 6-year deal, say, in years 4, 5, and 6, he might not make as much as he would if he were to hit free agency and after 3 years. And that's sort of what Trent Williams' contract was. It was a 6-year deal, but it was essentially a pair of 3-year deals that change after those first 3 years. So, but yeah, I mean, Nick Bosa, in terms of being, I don't know that he wants to be a team owner. I think he kind of likes just, like drinking smoothies and working out and eating protein shakes, or drinking protein shakes and stuff. But I don't, but yeah, I mean, to your point, he's going to make a whole boatload of money over these next few years, particularly if he stays healthy.
The Bosa FC, Sacramento. We could do it.
Hey, Chris, what do you, if you had to, nobody's going to hold you to this. We're just having a good time. We're having a conversation. What do you think is the more realistic path to another professional sports team? MLS, MLB, or NHL?
It's definitely MLS, because they're at 30 right now. And it would appear that, if they can get more expansion fees and spread out, another $500 or $600 million expansion fee to all their teams, and they would do that. So they could go from 30 to 32 teams pretty quick. And Republic FC and the mayor would argue that they're a relatively turnkey operation in terms of having the infrastructure in place, having the stadium deal in place. Like, they're ready. They're, the way they talk about it is, they're ready to put shovels in the ground. They just need to cross some T's and dot a few I's. And so I think one of the things they were waiting on was this most recent MLS expansion announcement, because I think they were still kind of in the running. And it's sort of this chicken or the egg thing for them. It's, are investors waiting for MLS to make the decision about Sacramento, or is MLS waiting on Sacramento to show that they have the investment to, make the stadium deal happen, make an expansion fees potentially happen. So I think that MLS is probably the most likely, because they're gonna build that stadium regardless, and they're gonna make it expandable. So it might be, the first iteration of it might be 15,000 seats without like any overhang or anything like that, and then maybe they get the expansion team, and then in an off season, retrofit it or add on seats and add the overhang that's apparently required in MLS. So I could definitely see that happening over the next 4 or 5, 6 years. If MLS does have an appetite, which it seems to expand from 30 to 32 teams. In terms of baseball, I mean, we'll have to see. I know Rob Manfred is bent on expansion. Getting $2 billion in expansion fees from each new team is a whole lot of money that I just don't know that we're going to see come from somebody in Sacramento. There are no billionaires in Sacramento, and Vivek doesn't live in Sacramento, but he's only worth 700 million. I mean, unless do you guys know of any billionaires in Sacramento?
I mean, just the one across from me.
What's this guy
So
talking
that's the
about?
only one I know.
What's this guy talking about?
Did you see Manfred's quote about
Manfred's just a jackass?
The worst.
Rob Manfred was asked about what was the thing called the reverse boycott.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, it was great. It was like almost like an average Major League Baseball stadium.
What a jackass.
I hate that dude. That dude is such a piece of crap.
One thing that's never been explained throughout this entire process, at least from like an official who would know, is why the current Coliseum site is not a viable site for anybody. Right? Because in the Bay Area, how many places do you have parking? Do you have BART? Are you close to major freeways? Like, that's really the only one. And it's sort of perfect for a stadium site. And it's the reason why there are 2 venues there currently. Like, I understand that maybe John Fisher can get a better deal if he can center the deal around building commercial buildings or real estate or whatever else. But like, that's a perfect place for a stadium. And the fact that everybody's jumping through hoops to try to get something done in Howard Terminal, which never felt realistic to begin with, given all the infrastructure restraints that they already have. There's been no answer as to why the Coliseum site is not viable. But the only thing anybody could surmise is, well, he probably couldn't get all of the other deals done to fund the stadium, which to me, like, if you can't privately fund a stadium, just philosophically, you shouldn't be able to own a sports team. Like, period. If there were somebody in charge of all sports and could make rules for owners, which will never happen, but if owners had rules and it was like, if you have to move a team and you cannot, because you can't privately fund a stadium, then you shouldn't own the team. And sports would be better in every facet in every town if that were the case.
I agree 100%. I'll say what it is. Nobody will say it. I'll say what it is. It's because the Coliseum is in the east. The surrounding area. They don't want to put nothing around there. They don't want to do anything that would build up that area or enrich that area. And that's what it is. You know what I mean? And they obviously won't say that, but
that's why certain acts go to Oakland and not the Chase Center.
Absolutely.
And it's why it's the Chase Center and the Oakland Arena.
Absolutely. 100%. So there's that. I had a tweet yesterday after seeing Brody Brazil break down on the telecast of it was the pre or post game show. I don't know. But I mean, what's going on with the A's? The more, we see these things and we get, we talk about it daily. At first I said it was the worst thing that probably ever happened in Major League Baseball. I took a step back because honestly, I'm not even speaking hyperbole. There is one thing, the whole not letting black players play in Major League Baseball. That probably is the only thing worse than what's going on in Oakland. I really believe that. This is terrible.
Yeah, it's bad.
This is terrible.
It's a top 10 market in the country. When the team is good, people have shown out. Even when, the stadium's been a bad venue for 20, 30 years now, and people have gone when the team's been good. And John Fisher hasn't paid anybody legitimate money, a star player, quote unquote star player, since Eric Chavez. right? And he had the audacity to trade away all the team's good young players who went to the playoffs multiple times and then raise season ticket prices. Yeah. And not, you can't get food in that place. The bathrooms are horrendous. The fan experience is awful. It's just like, it's major league, but real life. And it's just, it's really awful. And, as somebody who was an A's fan before all this stuff started happening, it's super disappointing because, I know I've been there. Like, I covered a game. I forget what year it was, 07, 08, something like that. A's playoff game against the Detroit Tigers. And it was a game 5 in the first round. And Justin Verlander pitched. And he said after the game, Detroit won. And that was the best atmosphere I've ever been in the playoffs. And that was when the upper deck was tarped off. It was just 30, 35,000, whatever. And like, A's fans bring it. And it's just super sad that, because of one owner's inability to put a deal together and just his overall greed and putting, taking the handouts first, getting the relocation fee waived, getting the public financing from Vegas and all that stuff. And I'm not saying that Oakland as a municipality is blameless, because I do know that that's generally, even outside of sports, that's a tough place to build new things and work with the local government officials and stuff. But like, it's just sad that he chose this route instead of just selling the team, because there are so many wealthy people in the Bay Area who could, make things happen with the A's in Oakland.
Really great stuff, Chris. We can't thank you enough for spending so much time with us. We've got to get together more in the off season, man. We appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me on. We definitely got to do something soon.